Okay. So we were looking at this early book of criticism of the Chasidim, more than criticism, really cherem, and this is a typed up version, a choveret from 100 years ago of the original book, which I have the original. I looked back and forth; it's the same. And the book is called Zamir Ritzim Charvas Tzur. Now, this is a compendium of about 6 letters that were written by mostly by rabbis in Vilna, or the Bezdin of Vilna. It's not exactly clear, but signed by many people, and written. For instance, the first one is written to the city of Brody, and it's a warning about the Chasidim. And we took a look at it. It criticizes the Chasidim, and you can see that it talks about who the Duke is, that it was published under, Duke Joseph Tesharta, and he has about 6 other names, including Stalinik and Litvasky. Must be from Lithuania. The Tfus Machokek of Tzvi Hirsch. It was published by Tzvi Hirsch, Ben Aryeh Leib, and then we know that this letter, Hatik Torah Igeres HaKnos, this first letter was called Igeres HaKnos, the letter of zealousy. Nichtav Mekrian Emana Ir of Ein B'Yisrael Kila Kadesh of Vilna, was written by the rabbis of Vilna in Yom Ches Iyar, 1772. So just after Pesach, Min Ish Echad Nechbad Mefursam. We don't know the name of the writer, but we don't know the name of the writer, and this letter itself was not signed. At the end of some of the letters, there are signatures, but not at the end of this first letter. The second letter is a letter from Brody, where it was an announcement made in Brode. But this letter is a letter from Vilna to Brode. And it's critical of the Chasidim, it's wary of the Chasidim. We mentioned some of this yesterday. It's very interesting stuff. It criticizes them for being too happy. There was a minyan in Vilna, what was called the Karliner minyan, and that I think is what this is all aimed at. That's their experience of Chasidim. They're always in joy because they say that atzvut, that depression, it takes away the yichud, the awareness of God. And God forbid, they say, you shouldn't, be depressed about your sins. It's obviously, as we mentioned yesterday, is reminiscent of Rabbi Nachman. They wait before they daven too long hours, and it makes them daven after the time of davening. And so they don't get either, and they're concentrating on davening instead of learning. It's interesting that very, very early on, these are the criticisms. And they don't focus on the meaning of davening. They only believe that saying the words is what's important. In other words, it's an ecstatic experience rather than an intellectual one. And they do handstands during davening. It's funny, like that. I never heard of it before. I don't know any Chasidim who do handstands, but that becomes like a big criticism. Again, you have to keep in mind when this is happening, right? We have Shabtai Tzvi 100 years before. We have Joseph Frank 15 years before. We have Chassidut, and then we have the Reform movement. And of course, Chassidut and the Reform movement are really emerging at the same time out of the Enlightenment. Okay, calls them Agudat Ezov, La'azov min Hagei Rishonim. They are like a bunch of hyssop because of play on the word Ezov, to forsake. They forsake the Torah. I think we're around here. Hein Ela Katzot Darkehem B'Shemetz Tavar Nishma Bahem She'i Efshar Lahalot Adavar Ba'et Sofer Al Pnei Hasadeh Migodol Hatoeva Nas B'Yisrael. We can't even write everything, the author says, because it's such an abomination. That's an interesting method. Mashlo yamin, things that you wouldn't believe, imlo yisaper mipalozim. We wouldn't believe them if we didn't hear them from people's mouths. So there's this sense of, that it's interesting, right? Because the criticism so far is things that we actually see as praises of Chassidut today. So I understand why they're critical, but does handstands and not understanding the meaning of davening and being too joyous and focusing so much on prayer and davening late, does that add up to toeva? Is that really an abomination that you wouldn't believe unless you had heard it? So either there's something else going on, and there was rumors that they were involved in other things, like more Sabbatian type of things, or Frankist type things. It's almost like there was a little bit of conflation between the Frankists and the Chasidim, which makes sense. They're so close in era, and they're happening at the same time, and they're both different. Obviously, the Frankists are turning the Torah on its head. They do the opposite of what's in the Torah. And, there's these orgiastic things going on with the Frankists. Obviously, the Chasidim are extremely different. Okay. So let's do a little bit more of this, things where we're up to. And we'll see their language. Mashlayam, and things that you wouldn't believe. Heina ikvotehem lo nidu, shehema malayim toch umirma. They are filled with mirma, with they're misleading us. And they give reasons for the things they do, but they're not true reasons. They're not good reasons. V'chil kalkalot l'shonam nichnasin divreihem b'lev kol am medina. And they have slippery tongues, right? They're able to put their words into the hearts of the people. So they're right. So they're being accused of being other, of being a divergence, and of being very good at convincing the people. Gadheina nistam achazan shoresh mahusam haya behemshech maasehem. Gadheina nistam achazon shoresh mahusam haya behemshech maasehem. Uva avonosenu harabim bishana deishtaked nitlu machmadei enenu gadim hamamushachnim al haroim ech bavonoserim mesu kama meos kemule chala v'atike. It sounds like they're blaming the Chasidim for children who have died. Mishadim, that it sounds like the children died and they're blaming Shadim for it. Goal Kain Azranu Kigibor Chalatzenu Leidav Lodia B'Shalmi Araza. Why are these terrible things happening? Samnu Libenu Al Darkeim Araim. So we aimed our hearts toward their bad ways. V'Yagenu Matzinu B'Chnafeim Dam Nikiyim. There is innocent blood on their hands. Ra Ra'inu Avan Bittul Torah. Right? Why are children dying? Because of Bittul Torah. Shari Mas and Mechorim, because of the other terrible things the Chasidim are doing. Sher Shalalos Laktav Maschal Hashem. We can't even write them because of desecration of God's name. So this is a very strange method, right? In other words, these terrible things are happening. Children have died, and we don't know why. So we're going to peg it on. Now, maybe the Gemara does say that if something bad happens, you don't know why. Maybe it's Bittul Torah, the lack of studying Torah. And who is responsible for the lack of studying Torah? Well, us Misnagdim are studying Torah, so it's the Chasidim. And we can't even write it, such a Chal Hashem. Uvechemlas Hashem al Beis Yisrael hasridim, and God having mercy on those who are left. Gilu hashamayim avonam ve'evan bekir tizak. The heavens will make clear their sin. Ki ekaf alehem pihem be'osfateim ke'esh tzarevet. Hashchin parachat parchu b'kulam. These are quotes from the Torah about shchin parachat. The disease is spreading. Tumar v'tzutza bokat v'ola derech chur paten charash. the impurity comes even through a small hole. Asher yishmu l'kol malach Hashim chover chevreim tzifri datotehem. It's comparing their books to chover chaver, which is sorcery. Mechuraim hema lahara beitev enotam. L'mechash miboy penyafutsu me'avonehem me'ayin nirpash u'makor mashchis al pi al pnei kol haaretz. There's a fear that this is going to spread. Bios shehid lu pirzon ministam kol chazon holchei derech ad shekimu ir ve'im b'Yisrael kilasenu k'disha Vilna. So we are in Vilna, we are trying to stop this. We've come together and for the zealousness of God. Uvitziruf kavod harav hagon av Bezdin. With the cooperation of the head of the Bezdin, v'tziruf shtei kitot dinei tzedek hayoshvim kisot l'mishpat kilatenu. And two, it sounds like committees. Now, who's Harav Hagon? Is that Rav Eliyahu of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon? Many academics argue that it was really the Vilna Gaon's energy, his approbation, that really launched the war against the Chasidim. That it would not have happened. That even though this is coming from, it's written by, seems like other rabbis, it's really the Gaon of Vilna that. Because he's a Kabbalist. In fact, the Gaon of Vilna wrote more in Kabbalah than he did in revealed things. And so there's a sense that that's where the legitimacy of fight against Chasidim comes from. And at the head of all of them is our crown, Hagon, Ha'amiti, Ha'makubal, Ha'eloki, the great Gaon, the true divine Mikubal, Asher Shamo Noda Bashar Bas Rabim. Everybody knows his name. Kovod Shem Tifarto, Tilato, the glory of his name. Malah Haaretz fills the earth. Ha'ir Michvodo, Moreno of Eliyahu, Chasid Va'anav. Eliyahu, this is the Gaon of Vilna. The Vilna Gaon, who is a Chasid. Now, he's called a Chasid often, the Gaon of Vilna, in this writing. And by the way, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, as I mentioned, who tries to go and talk to him, but he doesn't, the Vilna Gaon doesn't accept a meeting, doesn't take a meeting with the Rabbi Shneur Zalman. Rabbi Shneur Zalman always talks about the Vilna Gaon in glowing terms. He calls them these things. And the Vilna Gaon has said that we should chase down the Chasidim with energy. And their crown, who is Rav Chaim, this is one of the heads of there were two heads of this minyan in Vilna, of the Karliner, Karliner minyan, and that was Rav Chaim and Rav Ozer. And they end up beating at least one of them publicly. Shaya Kagid Mesharim, Magid Mesharim Bikilatenu. He was a Magid Mesharim. He was, and a Magid Mesharim means an angel that comes to you to learn with you. Natlo Ateres Rosho Miyot Od Mitinase B'Tiferet Hamagidud. And it sounds like he was a Magid, and he was, I guess, on the good side, and then he became a Chassid. Shun Mibnei Aliyahu Lokeb Kiflayim Karoi Lo Ligmol Kaprim Alav. And because he has gone from one side to the other, he's going to have to be punished for that many times. Od Ve'chinat Asu Negdikilat V'od Zot Shenit Asu Negide Kilatenu Viro Bam Habeira Lavar Kotsim Kamisham Sakot. We have to get together to burn up this is a very strong language, burn up the thorns that have developed within our congregation, within our kehillah, within our community. We need to burn the Hasidic books. We have to burn their books. Shonim Mikol Am Beit Yisrael, these books that are different from the Jewish people's books. Shar Beis HaKnesses, where should we do it? In the gate of the Shul. We should do it when Shabbos comes in. Eitzel ha. And this word comes up sometimes. I think it means in front of everybody. So they would do it Erev Shabbos. This is when they also beat them. It would be done Erev Shabbos because that's when everybody's like around and can look outside. And they would do it it sounds like they want to do a book burning in front of the shul on Erev Shabbos. For Hashem, Rosh Parah, Rosh V'la'ana, their heads are heads of wormwood. They lead people astray. They add sin to us. This has all been explained before. They do weird things. Just like the apikursim do. Who are the apikursim? So the apikursim are either the Frankists, who are right before this, or the Enlightenment, probably the Frankists. Maybe another form's not around yet. It's 1772. Piv ansa rashatan iser samo nevel shemo asher haya lefnim b'Yisrael l'shem l'tila mamash l'navi sheker. People who were great rabbis have become nevi'ei sheker, become false prophets. Lo sham kishema. Right. Obviously, there's a lot of danger here, right? And it's because you're talking about people who are learned, people who are committed, right? Ultimately, it's very hard. It's much harder to fight against the Chasidim than it is, against the Frankists. The Frankists are clearly doing things that are against the Torah. The Chasidim are made up of great rabbis. So right, velo kishema gedolim. They have in their wicked group people like Rav Mendel of Minsk. Rav Mendel Hanal, and even Rav Mendel of Minsk, he's doing these weird things, which have never been done among the Jewish people. So it's interesting, right? In other words, in a way, like you have to say all these radical things about them. You have to label them as sorcerers and apikursim, and you have to do, because it's not obvious. And as if it were so obvious, right? Like maybe Shabtai Tzvi, 100 years after he becomes a Muslim, it doesn't take that much to. I mean, it did. It took 100 years to get him out of the Jewish people, but like in a way, you don't have to wage a war, let's say for us today, against reform. If you're an Orthodox Jew, that's reform, you're Orthodox. But if you disagree with so-and-so about the role of women in leadership in Judaism, so you have to call them all kinds of names because it's much more dangerous. That's, so what you see here on the one hand just seems, especially to us who live after the time when the Chasidim, when Chasidim are accepted, pretty much. When I was young, it was a little different. When I was in the late 80s, when I was in very Litvish yeshivas, there was a bit of a war, especially around the messianism of Chabad, and it was hatred, terrible, and fighting. Sometimes I think it would even come to blows in certain communities, but they're fighting a fight from 200 years ago. That happens, but in a way, I think you get more radical language when you sort of need the polemics, because I'm assuming. On the other hand, this comes so soon after Shabtai Tzvi and the Frankists and the Enlightenment that it's just so much threat that maybe we understand it. Okay, I'm going to be away tomorrow and over the weekend, so I'll be back Monday. Maybe we should be able to learn Monday.
Okay.
Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you.
Okay.